Hello, welcome to the series of interview with cybersecurity experts at Cyen. I'm Tasheva, your host. And today we have the pleasure to welcome an academic. With us, we have Mikołaj Barczentewicz, who is an associate professor at the University of Surrey, as well as senior scholar at the International Center for Law and Economics at the US. Welcome, Mikołaj.
Thank you for having me.
Mikołaj brings different perspectives. So he is he's studying EU law in the UK, but he also studied law in Poland. So you're also Polish, so you bring kind of the two parts, two ends of Europe together. And it will be interesting to discuss with you a recent publication that you published. So this is what catch my attention of a very interesting debate going on around the DMA challenges to user safety and some controversial apps that were then allowed on otherwise legitimate app stores. But before that, we can start with the big picture. So we know that security is a very, very important objective nowadays in Europe, and cybersecurity also is a pillar of it. But also competition has been one of the pillars and key priorities in the last years. And we have seen that many regulation as well as on cybersecurity and ICT are focusing on competition law and basically impacting how major companies do business in Europe. In your perspective, as someone teaching EU law, how are the policymakers striking the balance between ensuring a robust cybersecurity measures and avoiding competitive restrictions in the mobile industry specifically?
So, what I think policymakers should be doing is that they need to avoid magical thinking that you can pursue all policy goals like competition and security at the same time, but without thinking seriously about how they interrelate and about trade-offs between them. What usually happens, what I've been observing, especially in Brussels, is that policymakers at first pretend that there are no tensions between different policy goals. So, for example, they pretend that competition policy can be done fully in separation from cybersecurity and other concerns. Then experts push back that this is obviously wrong because it's obviously wrong. And then policymakers fall back to adding what I call magical phrases to legal requirements. And those magical phrases tend to effectively amount to something like, you now have a legal duty to do this thing, which clearly creates new serious cybersecurity risks, but it's also your duty to make sure that there are no additional cybersecurity risks. Have fun, it's not our problem anymore. And so that's not a great situation. And what should be happening instead is a serious dialogue about how those things interrelate.
And when you say a serious dialogue, so there is dialogue, and we do have spent a lot of time discussing in the EU. Do you feel that maybe we are not discussing within the right communities, or maybe we're not focusing on the key points? Because as you say, eventually input is considered, but maybe too late and maybe not in the right place.
So I think that DMA, the EU Digital Markets Act, is a very good example of how the way this worked. So it was clearly designed and conceived as an idea as some kind of industrial policy measure. So only thinking about economic competitive effects. And people who were involved in it, they were thinking that this is their only job. And once this became a legislative proposal, their job, their KPIs were just to push it to the final line. So any other concerns were just a distraction. They very much saw this as not their problem, it's someone else's problem, and their job is to get this deal done. And in that climate, that's not conducive to listening seriously about other policy goals. So I think that DMA shows very well what I mentioned in my previous answer, that at the beginning there was a dismissal of security concerns, and in the end the compromise was adding those phrases which now are a bit of a problem for both the companies and the European Commission to make sense of how can you do those new things that introduce risks, but at the same time satisfying a requirement that actually there are no new risks, right? So how do you deal with that? The deal struck was based on some, you could say, a magical assumption that there are no tensions, and then and now it's not clear what will come out of it. So I think that that is a bit of a problem.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned DMA. We, as cybersecurity compliance experts, we know best the security regulation, and I can relate to what you say in the Cyber Resilience Act, for instance, which is going to come into completely enforced within Europe by 2027. So it aims to regulate the security of digital products with digital elements, so any software or IoT devices, or just standalone software which is sold in the EU market, which, as you know, it's kind of it's very broad scope. There is a very large amount of things that fall within this regulation, and there is also conformity assessment requirements, which put emphasis, of course, on the security of the product, but they require also competence for security labs, for national authorities, for also the companies. They have to find the expertise to be able to embed this security, but also show compliance within. So again, in this regulation, I also found this interesting. They recognize the issue. How are we going to get there? And they solved it by making responsibility of the member states to create communities and skills necessary to then serve the regulation. But this is kind of the policy talk, right? It's also very important to see what happens on the ground. What are the implications, basically, for companies? And if we look at the DMA in specific, so you wrote this article showing how opening the links from one application which is vetted to any other place in the internet could create security, or in your case was unethical applications which were downloaded. From our perspective, this could be also problematic when it comes to corporate security. So one of the major corporate security policies that is across many companies I've worked with is you cannot just download application from the internet. You have to use either, if it's a large corporation, their own IT offerings, or in many cases, companies trust providers like services like Google or App Store for some level of security. So with this cross-linking, do you think this would sustain? Would this be really a policy that could continue, knowing the security concerns associated with it, and what are the other risks maybe related to it from legal perspective?
Sure. I would say that the DMA's version of legally forced interoperability between systems and applications certainly reduces security. There is no reasonable doubt about that. The question is only by how much does it reduce security in any specific way, and whether that is justified by other policy goals. And as I said, this conversation did not really happen during the DMA's legislative process. So now we have the rules which are a bit unclear, and the European Commission, the companies, all the app developers, everyone interested, kind of trying to make sense out of it. I will not be surprised if some aspects of this end up before courts, and we will not get final clarity before then. So again, that is not an optimal situation. But just to especially to those who may be less familiar with the DMA, maybe it would make sense to say something about specific innovations. So one that is widely discussed is the possibility of using alternative app stores on Apple iOS devices. And another one that is also often discussed, especially for mobile application developers, is a potential possibility of allowing apps to have greater access to device capabilities. For example, like refreshing application state in the background, which is now managed by the system for the reason of, for example, preserving battery life, right? So now the system quite vigorously decides which apps get to update and when, and some app developers hope that, oh well, wouldn't it be great if we could control it from an app level? So I understand that from the perspective of a developer of a mobile app, it may seem like a good thing that they might be able to use an alternative app store or potentially have greater access to the phone's capabilities. But I'm also sure that app developers will agree with me that preserving user trust is paramount. And I'm guessing that this is especially the case for users who are used to rely on Apple's App Store and Google's Play Store, placing some trust in the security-oriented efforts of those companies. And personally, as an Apple iOS user, I know that when I download an app from the official App Store, and especially I use Apple Pay for payments, this is not only a streamlined user experience, but I also trust in this ecosystem. And this makes me much more likely to download more apps and to pay for them. Actually, I'm much less inclined to download new apps and pay for apps otherwise, even on my laptop, because I have greater control. I can download more things on my laptop, but I'm less inclined to trust than in, for example, where I have this sort of more curated environment. So what do you think will happen when we start getting very public scandals with security breaches or even user experience degradation due to other app developers benefiting from those new DMA opportunities? So I think the policymakers behind the DMA will, of course, find an easy way out, blaming companies like Apple and Google that somehow they did not prevent the risks that the law created. But from an app developer perspective, this won't solve the problem of undermining user trust in the whole ecosystem, right? And I'm guessing that the issue of trust may also be one of the reasons why many app developers will choose to stay and keep their apps in the official app stores and avoid third-party app stores. So if this is the case, then it is in the interest of app developers for users to keep trusting the ecosystem, not just their specific apps, but think about prospective users. How do you get this cheap trust in a sense that you get now in a curated environment if it becomes public knowledge that the environment is not really that curated anymore, right? So some market observers, this is a somewhat cynical view, but so far it seems right, that some market observers are starting to know that the only benefits of the DMA is that you can easily download a porn app on iOS. Because when it comes to the developers of other apps, they just don't, the situation doesn't really change for them that much because they stay in the original app store. So Is this situation is this going to stay this way? Well, possibly, but I'm not sure it's a massive improvement, at least so far. Maybe there are some huge benefits that I'm not seeing yet that will materialize one day, but for now it really doesn't look great as a record of the benefits of the DMA.
Maybe just clarify, is this a rule applicable to the EU today, or is this a policy discussion?
With added app stores on iOS, that's something that Apple added as a possibility, I think, only in the EU. So they effectively forked their iOS for to non-EU and non-EU versions. And I guess they will be maintaining those two versions for now. So in the EU version, you can use alternative app stores, and there are those app stores, one of which, yes, allows you to download a porn app if you want.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a little concerning for me because it feels like we are having such a major effort to support SMEs, increase their security, right? It's a lot about user awareness, and as you said, we relied on some kind of checks and shortcuts here and there in terms of technology. But knowing that 97% of EU industry, of course, is SMEs, which don't have huge IT teams to vet and block technology that could control basically the security of the end user devices. So companies like ours, 7 people, each of us using our own device for work, for private purposes, this kind of concerns me that it would open an opportunity for a lot of potential malware that could be distributed across different applications. And what is worse, of course, it's bad to lose trust, but from a security perspective, we don't trust anyone, right? So zero trust is, let's say, the new way of thinking. But it feels an even load of responsibility to the user. So now the user is left to bear the consequences, and it could be unfortunately very very disruptive for SMEs that might suffer actually a ransomware or a malware or a spyware. We are in very difficult political situation here in Europe, so it would be I think the threat is ever growing, so we cannot exclude all possibilities for using this possibility to hurt our industry.
If I may, on just on this point, I think you're 100% right, and think about it. So those risks that at some point came to be acknowledged about what the DMA creates in terms of the new risks. The answer was, and it's kind of like a hacker answer, the hacker mentality in a good sense. A hacker thinker mentality. I want to have full access and full control over my device, and I understand that. I run way too many Linux machines. I even have one phone on which I run a Graphene OS, a special flavor of Android, which gives very precise control over the device. So I understand this desire, but the problem is that most users and most employees, especially of SMEs, are not hackers, are not thinkers, and so that has been my frustration with the DMA and what I have considered as the DMA's threat model. It was not based on thinking about actual sort of realistic users. It was more like responding to a concern of a small group of experts who want to have more granular control over their devices without really thinking about how this will realistically affect the the threat vectors for ordinary users. And what you said about, because you could say, oh well, it really doesn't matter what's in an app store or what app stores there are, because companies can have device management policies. But as you said, SMEs, like, it's a cost. It's a cost in terms of both the infrastructure to rise to have mobile device management, but also expertise, because then it's on you to make those choices, right? So in a sense, yes, we are all about zero trust, but in a sense, it has been quite convenient to be able to, at least for the especially for the SMEs, to trust Apple, to put it in, or trust Google. That has been quite convenient. Whereas, so now the question that I'm asking is, are we in a strictly better situation where now to have a similar level of security, you actually need to invest in device management? I mean, if you can afford it, okay, that may be great, that may improve your situation. But if you can't afford it, then you might actually be in a strictly worse, your security posture might be strictly worse.
Working with a lot of SMEs, and unfortunately more on the awareness raising than security implementation side, I have to admit I don't see a world where in the next 5 years you could expect for SMEs to have mobile device management platform in place, let alone completely managed devices and visibility. So this is not something realistic we can expect. But what also triggers me is you speak about the limited group of individuals who want control. I personally think we often perceive individuals as users, but as Europe, we have to start thinking business. So half of the population is employee of someone, whether it's government or whether it's a private organization, and those with government organization will have much less freedom. So they would probably have this MDM, but the commune, the small, how do you say it, like communal house, municipality individuals, I doubt they would have very advanced endpoint security. Same thing for SMEs. I am telling you, it is a very, very difficult topic to manage, and I would rather have less responsibility as an employee user than more than I can handle on my own. And on top of that, what we have been trying to raise awareness and get people like familiar with the new threats in the new digital space, we get also this mainstream AI technologies and other emerging technologies, which are now at disposal for any attacker to use. If in the past we spoke about these very complicated threat scenarios as like government-led let's say attacks, which are of course more high target. Now everyone has at the tip of their hands technology that could perform attacks and perfectionalize every fraud scenario within minutes. How we at cybersecurity side, we do worry about the impact on security and how we have to rethink how we do security. And it's AI, of course, for the fraud, but it's also post-quantum technology that we have to implement to then continue the confidentiality of our information to continue. What is the impact you see for competition and competitiveness of AI, for instance? And are there any conditions attached when it comes to from the legal point of view?
When it comes to AI and competition, I'm quite optimistic. So we already hear about startups being able to achieve much more with less capital by leveraging large language models. And if it's not already the case, it will soon be that making, for example, mobile apps will become much cheaper and faster, right? Your go-to-market time will be
We're one of those
great.
startups, and we're fully riding the wave. Again, we have security in mind, but I can see how security kind of becomes like you don't have time. You're just so quick on the market that everything is just too quick.
That's true. That's true. But so I think that's great. And even in markets that some perceived as lacking competition, like internet search, uh, in those markets, it looks like those incumbents are facing potential disruption. So I don't know about you, but I already replaced almost all my searches, at least for technical computing issues, with state-of-the-art LLMs. I just change which LLMs I use, but I don't search, I don't really Google things, at least for like programming things, for example, right? So, and I think that AI itself is a very competitive market. When Lina Khan, the former chair of the US Federal Trade Commission, suggested otherwise in a recent op-ed, she was rightly met with widespread ridicule because it's really silly to suggest otherwise. And one of the reasons why it's competitive is that we have plenty of serious open source AI efforts, and even AI services that are not open source have new major players like OpenAI. That's it's not a company that existed as a major market player 3 years ago. I don't want to speculate too much about how AI will affect security, though, because some experts prefer to focus on how AI will further empower cyber attacks. Others prefer to the glass half full narrative about scaling up defenses with AI. My overall intuition is that security will become more difficult. But I don't think anyone really knows. And what I would say is, and again, thinking about trade-offs and balancing, I think that AI is such a great opportunity that it's the security concerns are certainly not a reason to pause AI. But and of course, one of the concerns why pausing AI, as some suggested, is a bad idea, is that it would be futile because it makes so much sense for one country to not cooperate. For example, China to not cooperate with a pause enforced in other countries. So a pause is really a non-starter. But what can be done, and I think that technology is changing too much too quickly that we can really have detailed legal rules on what should be done. So we, in a sense, there is no better way than, okay, we have general legal rules, and then it necessarily is up to the private sector to try to implement them and see what those generalized requirements mean in their context. So app developers just need to stay on top of the new risks and threat vectors from AI. For example, relying on identifying users by voice. That seems like a bit of a silly idea, and not just silly, but also like 2 years ago, it may have been just thinking from this traditional cybersecurity perspective. You think about threat vectors and a cost of attack. So a cost of attack by voice cloning may have been very high 3 years ago, which may have kind of justified voice recognition as an identification measure. Now it's almost free, right? So now it's really even for relatively trivial identification, authentication, just you're better not use voice identification. And I hear that actually in the US it may still be common for banks to use voice identification, which seems a bit ridiculous. But it's something that has changed, right? 10 years ago, this may have been more of a justifiable choice. Now, because of the cost of voice cloning, now the cost has gone down so much, so we need to update. It's not a new framework for thinking about cybersecurity risks. We still look at threat vectors, but we still look at cost of attack. It's just the cost of attack has diminished very significantly. So yes, and generally I would say that wherever you have security safeguards or procedures that were meant to work reasonably well on an assumption that attacking you is very time consuming, manual, would require a lot of effort, then now may be time to revise that, because actually those things that used to require a lot of manual effort, now may be much cheaper. So the spray and pray attack methodologies may actually become so sophisticated that it really sort of requires us to revise our assumptions. But I think that is still the best method. I can't see how the law can come in and just suddenly tell us what to do especially when the technology is changing so fast.
No, very, very interesting. And I feel I come from the industry, and for me, this faster the better. But even for us, it's a little bit too fast to catch up, and let alone at the multitude of real requirements we have now to comply when it comes to cybersecurity or privacy or AI development. So it is a little bit overwhelming, maybe. Maybe we will figure out very quickly, but today it feels like a big change of pace and of perspective. Looking at the future trends. So as we are going so fast, probably it's also very difficult to say what the future holds for us. But are there any policy gaps or anything you could already identify that would impact our cybersecurity and competition policy in Europe, and what would require urgent attention to keep on both sides, security and fair competition?
The challenge for the EU, I think, is how to be best placed to benefit from the ongoing technological development. And what we hear about openness to AI investment and even aligning public infrastructure, like energy infrastructure in France, with AI use, that all that seems optimistic to me. But thinking about legislative gaps, so I think the biggest gaps, if we can call them that, come from the uncertainty about how existing rules, like the rules on data protection, the famous GDPR, or copyright, so totally different concern, but very important, how those rules affect AI development and use. And providing some guarantees to EU-based AI developers and users would go a long way to strengthening Europe's position to benefit from this technology. And I think that Europe's opportunity stems especially from open source AI, and also especially from developments in smaller and medium-sized organizations or in research institutions. What all those organizations share is that they are unlikely to have resources to deal with legal uncertainties, which, for example, we still have very much so around data protection rules and AI and copyright and AI. So if we want more competition, and especially for Europeans to be competitive, then we should make sure that they are not blocked that way. And it's not just about rules saying, no, you can't have AI. So it's not about explicit bans. It's about the marginal effect of uncertainty on investment. And I think policymakers often really miss this. They say, "Oh, all is fine. There is no prohibition." But it's not just about prohibitions, explicit prohibitions. It's also about an environment, a regulatory environment which could be hostile by creating uncertainty, or welcoming by providing clear guidance. Okay, so if you do those things, in terms of safe harbors and so on, if you do those things, you will be fine. Maybe we'll revise those rules in 2 years, but at least for now, you can run with that. We don't have it, at least in those areas like data protection and I think copyright to a lesser extent, but I'm less of an expert on copyright.
So it doesn't seem like we're going to have something that we can prepare for unless we say we can prepare for the uncertainty. to navigate and to be agile so that we can adapt our security first, because eventually every company um, has to take care of their own security to be able to continue existing, right? But companies also protect individuals, and individuals are the company. So that's very important to figure out how to stay agile. From what I gather from you, it's uncertainty that we are facing also on the legal
Yes.
grounds.
I don't think the law will tell us what to do in terms of cybersecurity, or at least when the law starts, especially including very detailed rules, they risk being outdated too quickly. So I'm not super bullish on more rules, more EU rules on cybersecurity, especially on a very detailed level. But so I think that responsibility, and this is inevitable to a large extent, is that the security responsibility is on the private sector. But what I can say is that if the private sector is enabled by AI, has well, more resources that they don't spend on something else, hopefully, maybe with enough cybersecurity awareness on which you're working, they will be motivated and will have resources to also think about that.
Mm. No, it's very interesting. You make this point, but how I think about cybersecurity is not cybersecurity policy. I think we have more than enough now to digest. But what is important to know is that cybersecurity is literally business security, and it touches upon many elements, and everything that happens in the world has an impact on cybersecurity, unfortunately. We discussed today the DMA we touch upon in terms of interoperability, openness, which opens, of course, the threat vector and brings more responsibility to the users. But think about any ban, as you said, of AI or specific technologies. We have had this on our skin in the past when there was the first sanctions against Russia already in 2014, and majority of European companies at the time were using Russian software like Kaspersky for security. So what do you do then? So all these developments outside security have also very significant impact on the security considerations and choices of organizations. I hope you keep this in mind in your analysis, and I do hope that policymakers as well as the industry could figure out a way how to bring the objective further without harming another one at the same time. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Mikołaj. It was a pleasure to discuss with you. And for all our viewers, if you like this content, subscribe so that you can get more of it. Thank you.